The year is 7. For over a decade, a series of taxes, laws, and military occupations have pushed the American colonies to the brink of rebellion. The port of Boston is blockaded, and British troops stand guard in the streets, a daily reminder of a crown that refuses to listen. The air is thick with anticipation. Both sides know that a single spark could ignite the entire continent. That spark was about to be struck, and the world would never be the same. On the night of April 18, 1775, General Thomas Gage, the British commander in Boston, ordered a secret mission. A force of nearly 800 British soldiers would march under the cover of darkness to the towns of Lexington and Concord. Their mission was to seize and destroy a cache of colonial military supplies rumored to be hidden there, including weapons, ammunition, and cannon. It was a mission meant to decapitate the burgeoning rebellion before it could truly begin. But the colonists were prepared. The British, despite their secrecy, had not gone unnoticed. A network of colonial spies saw them preparing their boats and quickly signaled with 2 lanterns from the Old North Church, 1 for land, 2 for sea, to signal the British were crossing the Charles River. Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott set out on their now famous rides, warning the countryside. "The British are coming," they shouted, rousing the sleeping militias. By dawn, the British secret mission was a secret no longer. At dawn on April 19, the British force arrived at the town of Lexington. On the town common, they found a small company of local militia, armed and ready. The British commander ordered them to disperse. The militia began to scatter, but an unknown person fired a shot. To this day, no one knows who fired that first shot. But in that moment, it didn't matter. The British regulars, hearing the shot, opened fire. In a brief chaotic skirmish, 8 colonial militiamen were killed. The British marched on, but they had just crossed a point of no return. The shot heard round the world had been fired. The British marched on to Concord and began their search for the colonial arms, but most of the weapons had been moved, and they found only a few. As they were searching, hundreds of colonial militiamen were gathering. At the North Bridge, a much larger, more organized militia company confronted the British. This time, the colonists held their ground. When the British fired, the militiamen returned fire, forcing the British to retreat. It was a stunning turnaround. The small group of farmers and merchants had just fought the world's most powerful army to a standstill. What followed was a brutal 20-mile-long retreat back to Boston. The British were no longer a formidable army on a mission. They were a group of terrified men running for their lives. The woods and stone walls of the countryside were filled with angry colonial militiamen who fired continuously on the retreating British column. By the time they reached the safety of Boston, the British had suffered over 250 casualties. The militia, on the other hand, had suffered fewer than 100. The war for independence had officially begun. The British army was trapped inside Boston, surrounded by a colonial militia that had gone from a disorganized rabble to a determined military force overnight. The military stalemate that followed was a strange one. The British, with their professional army and powerful navy, were confined to Boston. The colonial militia, now a hastily formed army, had them trapped. But the colonists were in a precarious position. They had the numbers, but they lacked everything else: a central command, discipline, training, and most importantly, heavy artillery to bombard the city. The problem of artillery was solved by a daring raid far to the north. A Vermont militia led by the charismatic Ethan Allen, along with a force led by Benedict Arnold, launched a surprise attack on Fort Ticonderoga, a British fort on the shore of Lake Champlain. The fort was poorly defended, and the raid was a stunning success. They captured not only the fort but also over 60 cannons, mortars, and other heavy guns. These cannons were the key to breaking the stalemate at Boston. As the stalemate wore on, the British decided to break out. They planned to seize the strategic hills around Boston, but the colonists got there first. On the night of June 16th, they fortified Breed's Hill, a position that overlooked the city. When the British awoke the next morning, they were stunned. The British general, William Howe, ordered a direct frontal assault. In their red coats, the British regulars marched uphill in perfect formation, a sight that should have terrified the colonists. But the colonists held their ground, under strict orders. Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. The British advanced, and at 50 yards the colonists unleashed a devastating volley. The British lines were decimated. They retreated, reformed, and charged again, only to be met with the same deadly fire. On the third charge, the colonists, now out of ammunition, were forced to retreat. The British had won the hill, but at a terrible price. They had suffered over 1,000 casualties, a casualty rate of over 50%. The colonists had lost the battle, but won a profound moral victory. The battles of
of Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill proved that the American colonists were not a disorganized rabble. They were a serious fighting force capable of standing up to the world's most powerful army. They had their resolve, their bravery, and their territory. What they lacked was a commander. That was about to change. As the survivors of Bunker Hill gathered, a Virginian was riding north, sent by the Continental Congress to take command. He was a veteran of the French and Indian War, and his name was George Washington.